Hi, welcome to the second installment of a grand 15-year-long Science Fiction Masterworks group discussion series. Today we are reading the second book of the Science Fiction Masterworks. We're reading them in the order they were published as Masterworks. So today we're reading I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, which I have somewhere over here. Yeah. Um, and with me, I have some wonderful people. Susanna, would you like to start us off with introductions?
Hello, my name is Susana Imaginário. I write fantasy, and I recently started a YouTube channel where I rant about things.
Well, my name's Chris-mohan. I also have a YouTube channel, which I sometimes post about movies or books, and occasionally appear on other people's channels and talk about things that we generally love.
I'm Jared. I run the Fantasy Thinker BookTube channel and do some blog stuff on page chewing and like to talk about this stuff as well.
Hi, I'm Robin from Bookends and Biscuits. I have a YouTube channel where I mostly talk about sci-fi, so this series is great for me. I'm very happy to be discussing it.
And I'm Layla Goshi. I am a writer, poet. I have a website and YouTube channel called Melody Magazine.
Nice. And I realized I forget, as usual, to introduce myself because this goes up on other people's channels as well. My name is Varsha, and Reading by the Rainy Mountain is my YouTube channel. So this book I did not expect to like because it's a vampire story and a zombie story wrapped into one, but yet it really worked for me. What did you all think?
Yeah, loved it. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was surprised because I watched the movie first. One of the movies, I watched the one with Will Smith, and I really liked it. And I was a bit disappointed at the beginning when I realized it wasn't the same thing. And I kept reading just because it was short, and I figured, well, I might as well continue. And then, I'm glad that I did. And the ending, it really broke me. Yeah, it was one of the best endings.
Mm-hmm.
This is a reread for me, and it's only when I got to the end of it the second time I was reading the afterword. I'm sure lots of you read it by Stephen King as well. When he actually, like, this is like one of these dumb things. I never really considered that it was a horror book, but it's very clearly a horror book. The kind of genre hadn't kind of filtered into me because it's about a lot of things aside from the horror. You know, the important stuff and the bits that I really liked sit outside maybe the thrill of the chase or him getting hunted down. So
yeah. Every time my husband passed me by last night as I was reading it, he's like, "What are you reading and why is your face constantly in that expression?" Because I was so scared or sad or like there was just like a lot going on in the books.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed this book because I experienced a lot of zombie burnout, I guess, over my lifetime because there's a lot of zombie themed films, and I know these are called vampires in here, but they kind of do have a zombie type presence. So I was like a little wary going into it, and I was like, but as soon as the narrative started and the writing started, it really sucked me in, and I just love how it was all explained, and when you realize that it's kind of surreal that it's taken place in the 70s, and it's written in 1954, but it was taking place in the future in the 70s, and it's kind of surreal how that plays out because he doesn't really make too many predictions about the future and what it would have been like, mainly due because the world's been basically destroyed. but I really liked how I actually liked how it wasn't done in first person. It wasn't told like Robert was telling the story. It was done as it was all Robert's point of view, but narrated from not in a third person form. And so that really endeared me to it. And I loved how, and of course, all the themes he gets into in this book about solitariness and survival, the desperation of the character and that search and need for human contact and stuff. It's really well done.
Yeah. What I thought was interesting about that third person was that the author didn't refer to the character as Robert. It was always Neville by last name, which, there's a bit more distance than you would if you have just the first person, right? That was interesting. I was curious why he did that. But I don't have an answer.
No,
It gives yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I think it was exactly to add that extra distance. In this case, because it's such a short story, and I think it made it easier to empathize with the character from that distance than if it was himself narrating. So it's just adding to that.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and it allows you to analyze it a little bit more too when you have that that formal distance there, Robert Neville, all the time, and it also ties into Robert's need to find a scientific reason for the vampires to exist and stuff like that.
I think it's a key part of the story that you have to do it from a distance, because a lot of the emotions that you were talking about when you were talking about your face going from sad, etc., are weird judgment calls to make, given what the kind of final judgment of him as a person is in the book, and how we still feel affected by that. And if we were doing it from a first-person narrative, we would think we were duped. Whereas in this case, we can kind of look at it and go, we looked at his actions and we decide whether they were justified or not as he went through, and therefore could feel empathy with him because of all that went down.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there were also many lines or many statements that didn't seem entirely like we were in his head, just observing him from a distance, because there were things like if he had seen his expression, he'd be surprised, or something like that, something to that effect. So it wasn't just his point of view, it was observing him from a bit of distance. So yeah, that's interesting. I think Robin or Layla were about to say something. Sorry when I interrupted.
Well, what's on my mind, I'm not sure. What's on my mind is I was thinking back, to 70s novels and sci-fi and even the 50s, and they do all have this same type of theme that I've really liked, of like this small town America. I mean, even like Carrie, which is different, but kind of like this. Here's this small town and this normal situation with this undercurrent of either horror or mystery or something, and I like the simplicity of it, like the simple horror of it, if that makes sense. And I even would include like Ray Bradbury, if anyone's read Ray Bradbury books, but he tells them in the third person, and they have these weird circumstances in the midst of, what is seemingly ordinary, even when they're on Mars. I mean, there's this whole book by Ray Bradbury called The Martian Chronicles. And so anyway, that's something I really liked about this book. I felt like it was sort of that same theme. And to even put kind of a cultural spin on it or something, he had said it like more of in a 50s style neighborhood, but it being in the 70s after so much change happened, in the 60s, I just feel like there were these repeated stories of, like the world going crazy, between right after World War II to the mid 70s. And we're probably back in that situation now, but yeah, so that was just something that stood out to me generally about this book that I really liked. And also that if you once you finish it, if you go back and read parts of it again, I started seeing things a little different. Like, was his friend, like, we thought his friend was calling to him because he was out of his head and possessed, but maybe he was cognizant of all he was doing and trying to get them to join him. Yes.
Yeah. I think especially when he started looking for potentially curing the disease, like at least that seemed to be his goal at the outset. I started to wonder if this would lead to some sort of moral dilemma in the character about all the people he's killed so far, who maybe could have been cured. They weren't like really dead. So I think there's a lot of interesting fallout from his actions aspects that we could explore. He has a lot of guilt about his wife, right? And that, again, I think when you start to wonder how they died, I found myself wondering if, they had turned into zombies, his wife and daughter, and what role he had to play in their ultimate destruction, right? So that is really difficult to live with, especially when you're living by yourself. I thought there were many not explicitly written about, but some deep and powerful aspects that made me think a lot about like what would be the psychological and emotional fallout from this.
I was gonna say I very much agree. I think when you first meet his character, he's so flawed. You don't really like him at all. I certainly didn't. But you kind of, when you explore the background and how he got there, it's much more. You like become on his side almost. Not really, but it's much more understandable about where he's coming from and what he's been through and where he came to. But his scientific investigation annoyed me as a science person. But apart from that, it was fine.
Yeah, I think we'll come on to that. That was one of my notes to say the science in this. How does it work? How does it not work? I think just the original point though. I think a lot of the book is spent on showing the differences between Neville as a human and the others as subhuman, and that actually a bit what you're saying, Lila. When I went through the reread, I kind of went actually, but there's a lot of subtext in here about how they're exactly the same. There is no difference actually between them, and lots of things like he's afraid of the light when he gets up in the morning. He's kind of blinded by the light and all of those kind of things that go just like the vampires or whoever else is going along with it. So it's kind of like that kind of battle all the time between what he's telling us and what we see and what we judge as a reader and kind of what we take away from that.
Yeah, I just thought that was great. The only part that really got me was he seemed to he didn't treat his daughter, in my opinion, as carefully as he did his wife. And I just wondered, when I first read it, I said, well, the early stages and everybody's telling them to bring people to the pit. So that's probably what he did. But there was such a difference. I don't know. I just found that odd and kind of strangely horrifying on its own. Yeah.
That struck me as well. It made me think that Matheson wasn't a father. He kind of says that the real loss for him would have been his lifelong relationship with his wife. But I don't think, as a parent, you would ever get over the loss of a child and be okay with it, and kind of pigeonhole it otherwise. Like, it's very much an afterthought, as you say. It's like she's going to school, and then when she died, it was just like, whatever, I'll burn her. But the wife, I'll have to do something else with. Like, and either you make justification for a difference between them, which you didn't really do, or you do something else with it. I agree. That was the bit that I kind of went, you mustn't have lived this life, in reality.
I mean, it is a lose-lose situation, it's, and you can't really know what kind of family life he had. There's not really that much room for exploration there, without making the novel longer and maybe having a lot of unnecessary stuff that would have made it not as flow as well. But in the science I love how he bumbled through the science, because he's not a scientist, right? He's looking at through the library and stuff, and he's trying to figure out stuff that's just not in his field of training at all. And I love how it brings up the what he knows from popular culture about vampires, you know, and the whole Gallic thing, and he's looking up Dracula, and he's you know, he's trying to figure out all these things. And I thought it was I thought it brought at least a little bit of lightness, you know, that because the story is very heavy, and at least that brought a little bit of lightness to it to, you know, help us get through this kind of depressing story. You know, he's the last guy on the world as far as he knows, and and that's a lot of heavy psychological stuff to deal with, which you know, which really compounds the horror of the situation for this character. It's not just the monsters that are the horror. It's the situation. It's the loneliness. It's very powerful in that respect, and I think it feels to me more powerful than some of the hack and slash zombie movies we've seen over the past 50 years or whatever. That's what I really enjoyed about it.
Did anyone notice, or maybe I misunderstood, but some of them did seem like pure zombies, like no conscious awareness, but then others did seem to be conscious. So did anyone else pick up on that there were like two types of people?
It sounded like, from at least based on the characters' descriptions, that even those who come back from the dead have some sort of consciousness, that their brain is still working, and they're like, his wife, for instance, remembered who he was and called him by name. So, you know, they have a lot of functioning faculties. So I guess, I don't know, it's not really explored, but what does dead mean here? If the bacteria is making the brain work again, like that was, I guess, an interesting aspect of it that wasn't really explored, or I don't know if.
Wasn't it about a length of time thing? So it was how, because the ladies that not rescued him but came to the house, they were taking tablets to stop the progression of it. So I think it was length of time. If my memory serves.
Oh.
Because they were talking about the zombies as being lost to their primal urges, so they were basically just feeding at that stage. So they just wanted to feed, and they were basically saying that we're civilized, and that we are sort of setting up civilization again, but carrying this bacteria, carrying this bacilli, as it was called.
And why? This was a question that, you know, only occurred to me a while back, after. You know, if it was an inspiration for so many movies, and it's usually about finding the cure, and he was trying to find the cure, and he himself, you know, was the cure because he was the one immune. Why? You know, I know it would ruin the ending, and it's beautiful as it is, but it was the whole thing. Why are you taking those pills to, you know, manage this disease or this condition when you could try to find a cure? You have, you know, this person that is immune. You can work on it. I guess it would be a whole different story, but I can't help to, you know, consider saying, you know, what if?
Yeah, I think he sort of fudged up. I could be wrong because I'm not a medicine person, but antibiotics cure a disease, vaccines prevent disease. I think he sort of fudged both together in his explanation. I mean, it makes sense because the character is not a scientist or a doctor, so it makes sense that he would like not make that mistake, I suppose. But he claimed that nothing he can do would help because vaccines don't work. Sure, but antibiotics could. So I don't know what happened there. Like you said, Susanna, like they could potentially use what he has to create antibiotics, perhaps. I don't know if that's how it works. But...
I don't know either.
That was the I Am Legend movie, though. That's kind of what they did. I mean, he did create the cure or whatever for it. In this case, I think part of the visitation from Ruth, where she basically goes on a fact-finding mission to see what he knows, basically tells you that the expertise is gone out of the world. There is no expertise. He all of a sudden, this kind of not scientist is the expert on this disease, and anything that they know before they were going to kill him, they had drain out of him everything that they know, so they could then maybe take that forward and maybe do exactly what you were going to say. But there wasn't any school for people to go get educated. There wasn't any place for people to go other than these repositories or libraries. And at that stage, self-learning is quite hard.
Yeah. So the other thing, the plague seems to have gone on for many, many years, which means possibly many biologists and scientists were still alive. And he, as a non-science person bumbling around with random blood samples, found the bacteria. So isn't there possibly a case for, the scientists found it too? And so maybe the news media didn't do a good job of covering it or whatever, but he seems to have been doubtful of the fact that it was caused by bacteria in the first place, right? Sorry, go ahead, Robin.
No, I was just agreeing with your point. That's kind of what irked me a little bit. The fact that he's a complete non-scientist. He literally goes to the library and then goes and gets a microscope and then finds this. And I was meant to believe that no other actual trained scientists got that far. Like that's what annoyed me. Like you said, like it's not like everyone was wiped out in an instant. I get that it took time and everything else, but he can't be the only person who knows where a library is. That didn't really seem, but I mean, go for the story and all that malarkey. But
that could tie into his own delusions of being alone for so long. That he thinks he's starting to think, well, I'm the only guy, so maybe that's part of his. Because he never really actually found anything. So it was a cycle of failure, basically.
But both movie adaptations, Omega Man and I Am Legend, he's very clearly a scientist in both of those movies. They obviously seen that as a weakness in the story as well. They had to give it some sort of credence as to why he had done. The idea that he was immune because of this being bitten by a vampire bat in Vietnam was just a little bit right. The only person in the world that's been bitten by this bat was like, all right, okay. Whereas in Omega Man, he kind of finds the cure, discovers the cure in Omega Man, and doesn't get the chance to distribute it before everybody dies out. That's pretty much the idea in Omega Man. So,
yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I did find it funny, again, thinking of the period that the library was so miraculous just to have this exact information, the exact books that are easy to read and. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And also, how did he know? Okay, last thing I'll nitpick, and then we'll move on to other things. How did he know what to look for? Because, a sample has to be teeming with a lot of life forms. How did he know this is the vampire bacteria? Maybe, Jared, you're right. He was probably deluding himself on this. But then he did experiments where, light destroyed the bacteria, but he couldn't explain anything else. And his conclusion was mass psychosis, from what I understand. So, I guess there's room for interpretation there that he didn't know as much as he thought he did.
Almost on the unreliable narrator kind of front, because he knows that he understands things and everything else. One thing I did really enjoy, though, on the kind of his experimentation things and that was the mass psychosis almost of the religious side, and the fact that the cross didn't work for people who weren't. I loved that. I thought that was such an interesting concept, because I've not read that many vampire books, but no one else has gone down that road before. Well, I guess he was probably one of the first, but I thought that was a very interesting discussion point.
Yeah.
But it was almost like a retrofitted answer that he put in. You know, that I wonder if Matheson did that on purpose, because when he was doing the investigation, there was all this stuff that he couldn't get a rational explanation for, a scientific explanation, and the story is very much like, I don't know, I don't have the expertise. But as the book evolved, he kind of, well, that's obviously because, you know, of this thing, and we as the reader can go, yes, that's quite possibly right, and all that kind of stuff. But again, it was a supposition rather than an actual proven scientific fact or otherwise. But yes, that bit was interesting, especially when he got to speaking to Ruth about it, and he told her, and she went, "Oh, of course." That makes a 100% sense.
Yeah. But what about atheists? Maybe he had an encounter.
Didn't exist in 1954.
I was laughing on that
immediately.
and for the Hindus, which holy book would work?
Yeah, you gotta have a whole bunch of them.
Atheists only got invented in the 90s with grunge metal. You know, that's just how it goes.
Yeah. That was cool, though. I agree with you, Robin. I did appreciate that. I think in the very beginning, he asked a question about would a Mohammedan vampire respond to a cross? And then in the end, he sort of doubled down on that explanation. So I appreciated that, that they didn't assume that all people who die and become vampires become Christian.
So it was more, in a way, psychological then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That ties into his mass psychological hypnosis type of thing.
Yeah.
If he's trying to rationalize it in that way.
But the bit that really makes it work is the fact that it's associated then with very severe trauma as their death and kind of rebirth comes along, that they hold on to these ideas of vampires they've been told from they're younger and all that kind of stuff, so they fear the cross. So I agree, that bit was very cleverly done.
Yeah.
That was great.
So what we touched upon it briefly, but what did you guys think about the mass psychosis aspect? Did that seem convincing to you, or just him sort of deluding himself because he didn't have an explanation?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, I would tie it into him just trying to rationalize everything around him, because it's not making sense to him why everything's working the way it does, and you know, and why him getting bit by a vampire bat would you know, give him the immunity to this thing.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of it is left up to us to read it, to try to put our own thoughts into it and say, you know, and just think about all the stuff he's been through, and try to rationalize it right along with him as the story goes along, you know.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the more underlying themes through the book. What is the long-term effects of mass trauma? You know, so repeated mass trauma. You know, does every little step come back? And in the case of even his wife, it wasn't enough that she died. Actually, the chapter where she died and he talks through his grief and the period of grief, I think is absolutely magnificently written. At this have that whole like 3 pages that he does that as he's sitting at the edge of the bed. But him then kind of knowing that he's breaking the law by burying her, him putting it to bed, and then the door rapping. Like they don't even play too much with that, but we as the reader kind of go, oh my God. Like there's just another moment of just like pure trauma that you would never get over, but he just has this repeatedly do it, and then going out and murdering hundreds of these vampires day after day. You know, it's just, you know, what way does that play on your conscience? What way does that feed into your value system and all that kind of stuff?
I think I was wondering before we got to that point whether he had killed his wife and child the way he's been killing the other vampires. And I felt good when he went and buried her, that, you know, we've seen him visit her grave there. So like we're done and dusted with that. So nothing traumatic happened with his daughter and his wife. But then she came back. First, that was terrifying in and of itself. But then he had to deal with her the same way he did the other vampires. And he's just sort of learning how to deal with them, right? Like it was in the very early stages. He doesn't have his processed down and efficient like he has it now. So he probably tried a lot of things. So it must not have been a good experience. It's a lot to deal with. Maybe that's why he's constantly thinking about her more than his daughter later on. I did wonder about that too. Like he's just the burial aspects, his daughter was like less importantly treated, but also later on his daughter's not much in his thoughts, but his wife is all the time. So yeah, I did wonder about that.
I think also I was thinking about that question a minute ago about the whole difference between his wife and daughter, but when his daughter dies, his wife is there to support him. And also, as you said, he's following protocol, but then having the trauma on the trauma.
Yeah.
So his wife dying on top of the trauma he's already had, and then having to deal with it. I think I agree with you, Vash. I think that's definitely kind of like just, it kind of shows the escalation of all the crap he's had to deal with. So maybe that's why, exactly that, why he has more of a connection to his wife.
Yeah.
And even then, his own reaction to viewing trauma, like, because he's committed all the trauma on people for the past like 3 years in the book, and it's only at the very end of the book when he sees them actually butchering these people down that he goes, "This isn't right. What are you are barbaric." Like, and he hasn't got the sense to kind of look at it through his own lens, because he's taken all the murders down in the room. You know, he doesn't believe in murders anymore. That was a pop culture tale that didn't burn out, but also that he didn't have to look at himself. And I think that there's that allegory and metaphor that runs through the book of cracking the mirrors, getting rid of the mirrors, so that he wouldn't have to face who he is.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And it's funny how he looked like the monster when he was chasing down the woman that he saw her from there, and he looked like the monster at that point. And I don't know what do you guys make of that whole scenario where like she was trying to like fool him in or something like that, into their group, and she was a whole new type of vampire we really hadn't seen yet, like way more self-aware and way more, not like his neighbor who was just calling out his name all the time. And that was like what, 3 or 4 years later or something like that. So are these creatures evolving, or is that the sense you got?
Yeah, that they're evolving, and he was devolving. Yeah.
In a way, yeah.
So, which made the ending so wonderful, because maybe he was a legend or the mythical being, at the end.
And that ties into Matheson's one of his themes in here is like basically what is normal. That's because that changes. Everything that's normal changes over time, and there's always a new normal and a new normal. Now he's not the normal; he's the unique. He's the the legend, and it was just, I thought it was expertly done how it switched like that, and it evolved like that as the vampires evolved and as he evolved the other direction, I guess.
Yeah. I think the explanation we got there was that the bacteria mutated and they maybe got a less virulent version of it, so they got perhaps less sick. Because he has a realization at the end of a chapter that bacteria can mutate. That's all he says about that, and maybe that's what happened there. But I was curious. There were some, I guess, statements made, so to speak, about the nature of society that would form up at the end of an event like this, with some of the new vampires coming all guns a-blazing to destroy him, and they seem to enjoy killing. And they used to be the hunted, both by Robert to a certain extent, but mostly by the other vampires. And they enjoy killing as much as apparently Robert did too, because we know that he hated them and enjoyed when they died. So what did you think of that? Do you think that that's sort of an inevitable societal structure in something like this? Is he saying something about like base nature that we'd revert to if everything collapses? What did you all think about that?
I have lots of things to say about this. There is that battle at the end between the value system, or again, that question that Jared talked about, what is humanity or what is normal, as we're saying, what is it that makes us human, and the fact that he's very judgmental, coming from a place where he remembers and still very much the last human on earth, and the value system that went with the church, the value system that went with having a work, job, a family, all of that kind of stuff, and then being confronted with this group of young men in a world that's very vicious. He's saying their job is to go out and kill and help us survive, and within the function of society, that's a very important job. And of course, they enjoyed it in the same way that you sort of enjoyed it because you felt like you were doing good. He thought he was saving humanity by doing that without ever having a plan of or reason that actually at the end of it, if he died because he wasn't procreating and he killed all the vampires, there was nobody left. There was no life whatsoever, whether it's vampiric or human. He hadn't got that stage. So that kind of idea that society evolves to whatever it needs to be, and the people like back in medieval times, even further back, prehistoric times, the hunters were the people that were the saviors of society. They were the people that were important, and obviously we sort of abhorred violence to a lot more recent societal times.
That's a great point.
And from a story perspective, so he ended up being the villain in that, which I thought was a nice twist. Yeah, it's all about perspective, I guess. What is normal, what is right, what is justified. Yeah. Lots of questions in such a short.
Yeah.
The new vampires who were hunting down, were they still also, they're hunting him, but were they also hunting the older kind of vampires as well? All right, so there at least was a because if they just killed him and then that was it, then what? Would they feed on themselves, or would they but there was at least still a prey, so to speak, for that type of society to have an other or opponent, which those warfare in that kind of a situation usually leads to some sort of innovation to further a society along, because otherwise what would they do other than probably turn on themselves?
Yeah. Just a minor thing too about the feeding and all of that. After reading that a couple of times, and then he goes and gets himself a steak to cook. I don't know if anybody knows it. I don't know. I know this, like, okay, kind of I'm not a vegetarian or anything really, but I don't know. I just picked up on that maybe he's trying to say something there about being a carnivore and.
Yeah, I forgot about that. That was brilliant.
Yeah.
Pretty fun.
I had a question for the guys of this group as well. What did you find? Because I didn't really understand the whole random sexuality issues he was having and his almost crazedness about the women in the books, even the female vampires. And I was like, what on earth? But I don't know if you as a guy, if I read that differently than I would have done as a female. I'm not sure, because I found that super weird.
I kind of feel like letting Jared go first.
I just,
sorry, Jared.
I don't know, I kind of viewed it as a kind of a hyper realization for companionship. It's hard to put it into anything else other than that. He's been by himself for, I forget how many years it was before the story started. Because I'm not sure, I don't remember how long it was to the flashbacks. I'm assuming it was at least a few years that he's been by himself.
It was originally 5 months, and then it was 3 years. I think with the gaps in the book.
And so it's just, I think it's just another expression of loneliness, really. Maybe Matheson was putting it in a way that guys would maybe relate to better. I'm not sure.
I think you're being very kind.
I'm being very kind, yeah.
Very kind, looking at it in a kind of hyper. I think loneliness and companionship is very different to what he was, in my view, what he was describing. I was almost scared that he was going to essay the lady when he like to that point. I was just like, what the hell is he going to do with her?
Yeah.
So
that's a good point, because he has these thoughts, and eventually he found the woman in the field and went after her, and yeah, there was a point where if this book was written nowadays, it might have led straight into sexual assault and what have you, but I'm not sure Matheson would have gone there in the 1950s, because he wouldn't have sold a book.
But, there's the theme of him remaining his last bastion of civilization, and so there's kind of a theme of, well, if he does open that door and goes out, that's the end of civilization, really. So him fighting those instincts.
I kind of wish should have went first. I think it was quite realistic in a lot of ways. This man is drunk 90% of the time.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's true.
And alcohol, for good or for bad, accentuates kind of the edges of emotions quite a lot of the time. And I sort of equated it a bit to, if you think back to book 4 of The Expanse, Elvie, when she was sexually frustrated and kind of it affected her judgment center, and where she was like, she couldn't function and think. She fascinated in Holden for a lot part of that because of her sexual frustration. It was very, very like that, without giving spoilers too much for that book, and how he processed it. But by the time Ruth came along, his sexual being, or that part of his body, was actually quelled and dead. It was dead at that stage. He felt like he should be sexually attracted to her, and it was only the touch aspect of it where that started to come back in. It wasn't like he was looking across the street. He was, to me, when he was locked inside in solitude in this house, he's thinking about all the things that he couldn't have and he couldn't be, and the things that would never happen for him for the rest of his life. And he's, for me, he's looking at the vampires that are the females going, I'll never experience that kind of intimacy, your relationship ever again. And they know it, and they think this is a way to get him to come outside, because they really had nothing else. He was going out and murdering them in large numbers. They kept on sending women to him because they knew that women was sort of going to have an effect on him in some way on a primal level. So I know what you mean in terms of it's a bit weird, but I also think it kind of fit with the character as being this very flawed. I think it was one of the reasons that he came across as very flawed and very problematic, because you kind of went, he's not exactly somebody who'd want to spend 10 minutes in the company of either at any given time. He's not exactly,
Given the amount of focus on it in the beginning, I was sure that there's some sort of implication that, maybe he has the disease, but in some much milder form or something, and it's a symptom. But I felt like it had to have an input to the plot somehow, but I was disappointed when it didn't, and I didn't know what to make of it. So I'm glad, Robin, you asked the question. So yeah, it makes sense, I suppose, how you put it, Chris.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's his biggest weakness. The fact that this intimacy and this female companionship is his biggest weakness. Is why, the dog comes along, he puts his heart and soul in the dog, but when the dog dies, it's okay. But the fact of losing this woman actually as being the last bastion of him ever having intimacy is actually a real problem for him. It'll crush him.
Yeah.
And he's probably lost a lot of social graces, I guess. he might have lost how to act over that long period. Yeah, it does tie into his behavior later on when he does chase her down. Yeah, so yeah, that's an interesting question.
There was a line in there about how if it had been a year or two ago that he had found her, he would have
Yes.
violated her for sure, or something to that effect. And but that once I got over my anger at that statement, I was wondering what that was about, because he doesn't seem like, even for someone who has been living alone for 3 years, I guess sexual desire has to be like at the top of the things he wants for him to have to behave that way, or to even entertain those thoughts to himself. Like, he still has some sort of moral code, it seems like, and or maybe he's at the point where everything's okay, because like, who's there to judge? Yeah.
It wasn't as if he was taking these bodies before he killed them and doing a necrophilia thing with them. That definitely wasn't what was happening there. But he had a sense that companionship and intimacy, like at the very end when he met Ruth, he was kind of surprised how the curve of her breast, for instance, was something that he noticed. He had probably something he hadn't thought about in a very long time as being something that's alluring or attractive to him. And he's like, oh, I feel like I should be more sexually interested in this person. And literally, it's like, again, I think one of the points is like that kind of looking and objectifying is nothing without the intimacy of the touch and the hold. It was only when you get touched and they get held that it became, oh, this is something real for me now. These feelings are very different.
Yeah, maybe that needed to be there so we could explore that aspect of it. Yeah.
I think it fits with his whole, I think trauma and emotional issues go in cycles. And so he, we've seen him now go through different phases and cycles. So overall, I think it was, relevant to the story.
Someone mentioned the dog. What did you all think of that? I think that for me was up there with the scene of the wife's dying, in terms of like how heart-wrenching it was.
Yeah.
Very sad.
I don't know about anybody else. Did anybody else feel when you got another character for him to converse with, in this case just a dog, how much more the pages and the conversation and the story just flowed very quickly in that sense, as opposed to the kind of stop-start nature of his day and kind of the times of day and the period? I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
It was a major event that came into the story all of a sudden, and we're like, oh, what's going on? What's happening? It's funny how a dog can change the course of your interest in what's going on.
Right. Yeah.
And the possibility of it, I guess the bleakness would reduce if the dog had survived. I was hoping that he would, which he didn't, but he died too quickly. I thought it would take a while, or we'd get into some mad heroics where with all his research he'd find a way to cure the dog. But no, it just died. It was just this like mundane as that, which I thought was it's a great way to tell a story, but really disappointing.
I fully agree. I thought the dog, I can't, in the film, just because it's his companion in the film, isn't it?
Yeah,
so I immediately thought, oh, great, he's got a companion. It's all going to be wonderful. And then you're right, it happened so quickly. It was just like, oh, it's here. Oh, it's happy. Oh, we're sad again. Okay. So yeah, again, it was a very, very bleak book.
But the dog's not there long enough for us to really get devastated, because I think if the dog had been there around the time the dog dies somewhere in the middle of the book, you don't get the emotional payoff then at the end of the book. You don't get the point that he's trying to make towards the end about what is humanity. The dog kind of confuses that question, but it does give us that sense of how living and making decisions and kind of being afraid and all of those other emotions that aren't in the book, because you've got these kind of faceless zombies. The dog mirrors those for us in ways that he isn't, because he doesn't really ever seem to be afraid. He just has this existential dread until the very end of the book, I suppose.
Right.
I like how. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I like how we're constantly reminded by the narrative that Robert has to constantly stamp down his hope, like, don't get caught up in wild dreaming, and because he can't let himself have too much, or else it's going to be too devastating if it when it eventually doesn't happen. And how he just got so used to the horror around him, and that the monotony of his existence is what truly was his horror, so he couldn't depend on any kind of wild dreaming or hoping. That was just, I love how Matheson really played upon that theme throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's
I love how he did his inner monologues. His thought process, some genius moments. I remember taking notes back then. So well done.
And that whole theme of purpose, like what change does purpose in life give you? Like the only time that he stopped drinking and he started looking after himself is when he was doing the investigation. He became sort of alive again, and it had a vivacity to himself. Whereas all the rest of the time he was bemoaning his monotony, but also bemoaning the fact, God, when he found out the sunlight could kill the vampires, I wasted so much time, darling. Like, I could have had that time back, as if he was going to do something else with that time. He wasn't doing anything else with it, but he was very much resentful of the fact that he had wasted all that time, even though there was a day-to-day, time scale that he laid out for us. But actually, once his progress with the cure stalled, he reverted. Then he was back to drinking. He was back to, the wild man.
Yeah. I think even in the very beginning, when he says to himself that he'll make the room soundproof, and then he just doesn't get to it. A man with nothing but time on his hands is still doing, what I would do, make plans, and then not do it. 4 months later, it's still on my to-do list. So I thought that was really interesting, because it ties to this, I guess, how the depression, I suppose, in just having to do this day to day and not being able to get around to be more productive. I thought that was very interesting too.
No, it really was, and I think it showed the bleakness of his mind, because it was something that would basically improve his existence, but he was just so unwilling. It just was improving his existence wasn't important to him, basically. So yeah, that was a very interesting way. His monologue, how he's talking through it, was really interesting.
And it wasn't until he was nearly killed that he kind of goes, I should do something about this now. This is.
That was also quite interesting as well, because it's very, very bleak to the point of, like, you're not sure whether he actually really cares about being alive or not, and then he finds out he does care, that he wants to be alive, and obviously it doesn't end out very well, but he kind of refines the fact that actually he doesn't, he'd prefer not to be dead, which you don't always see the whole way through.
He keeps wondering. I thought that was really poignant, that why does he keep carrying on, and he has to, like, I don't know, there's some deeper instinct that keeps him alive, I suppose, to the point where he'd go to the library and do research. He's depressed on many levels because he's lost his family and everyone around him, but
I think part of the point is that as monotonous as his existence is, that survival instinct runs very deep. And I think he's starting to see that survival instinct in the vampires later on too. They want to live as well.
Did anyone else feel chills in that flashback scene when he sits in the car and Ben Cotman, that's his name, says, "Hi, Robert," and because we're so used to seeing him as this terrifying creature, when we actually see him in a proper setting, it's still vaguely scary. At least I felt pretty scared when I read that bit.
No, it was. I thought he was a great secondary character, I guess, because the way you're introduced to him is of this like almost ringleader of the bad guys, almost, and then have that, and then you go back and find out that it was his neighbor, and he had this whole like neighborly relationship, and then it gets to the point at the end where he's like, they better not kill him because I wanted to kill him.
Yeah.
Like it's his friend sort of thing, but he doesn't want anyone else to die. I thought that was at the end I was like that odd relationship they have was really, really interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
But it's part of the humanizing or the demonstrifying of the characters you're going through. I mean, we're just told they're vampires, that eat feeding their own, they send people out to die, for enjoyment or purposes. But ultimately, that was a person, that was a friend, that was his neighbor he used to check on. That the last time that he seen before that happened, he went in and his wife and Ben and his wife were sitting in single beds in that kind of mummified state, and you kind of go, oh God, this is more trauma. This is like, how do you recover from that one thing? Never mind all of these things.
Yeah.
Nobody else freaked out by the fact that it could very easily happen.
Yeah.
If COVID didn't affect just the elderly, I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah. It was an interesting book to read post-pandemic.
Yeah.
Especially the means of communication, right? Assuming that he's right about the dust storms being the primary carriers, which also nuclear apocalypse and giant grasshoppers and possibly mosquitoes and other mutations. That was interesting. So this is basically a post-apocalyptic zombie land. But it was interesting to read after COVID.
Yeah.
Especially those kind of ideas when COVID hit and the city centres next set were all empty and there were like deer walking about New York City and people, this is the earth healing itself. This was
there were a lot of empty streets and it definitely had that end of the world movie feel when you were looking at some of the news footage.
That's right.
So it's it was very relevant to that current situation to pick this up now, and just it's way more fantastical than what did happen or what will actually happen, but it still makes you think about it, and it's pretty cool that way.
Yeah.
Did you guys think that, because again, I don't think I realized quite how old this book was, but obviously I saw a lot of, it was weird for me because having read the other ones first or seen the other ones first, a lot of the references that people have used later on come from this, and I was just like, it was like light bulbs going off, like, oh, that and all this and that's been used elsewhere and stuff, and realizing this is probably one of the first places where it actually was written and taken from. So I didn't know if you guys thought that at all. Have any of you read The Girl with All the Gifts?
No.
That is so close to this storyline. It's crazy. I was just like, oh my god, she basically stole the whole storyline. So I thought that was it. But yeah, I recommend that if you haven't read that.
I wanted that myself. Like how much of stuff that came after was because you could see this, like you see Dawn of the Dead. That's one of the classic zombie movies, right? And has that same feel of people running from undead, even though these are vampires and these aren't like the slow brain eating ones, but how much other stuff was influenced by this, and where'd all these classifications of undead come from? It made me think about that a lot.
I think the idea of a survivalist too, of someone who's fortified their basically suburban home, because there's always been stories of people living out in the woods or whatever, but the idea of being in a suburb and having like this, encampment with, and being self-sufficient. I don't know when that was first done, or if this is one of the first times it's in a story. Because I thought of The Last of Us too,
Very strong allegories there.
Yeah, I was going to bring up The Last of Us when you were talking about how the virus spread, because I thought The Last of Us did that so well.
Scores, yeah.
Yeah, with the food chain. I thought it was a much better way around of describing it than a dust storm. But yeah, it's good.
Cool.
I was also thinking of Zombieland because a lot of the going to department stores, stealing cars, and
Yes.
other things looked very similar. And Warm Bodies, I suppose, because of how they eventually find out. Well, sorry, spoilers for the movie, so I won't say anything.
Brilliant.
What was I going to say? Yes, Susanna, you said that you really loved the ending. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you thought was so well done with it?
Oh, when the title finally made sense. You mentioned right at the end. No, it was the sudden shift in perspective when you get the whole picture and you realize what's going on. I mean, it is enough to forgive all the science and digressions and it just the whole idea, and it's no wonder that so many other movies, books, and so many stories were adapted from there, from that little idea. That it was huge. I love it. I love that shift. I could see it coming, but it was really when the title hit, that it was the creature of myth, and so that for me was awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool. I accidentally got a peek at the last page while I was still in the middle of the book, and I was wondering if he is just celebrating the fact that he found a cure or something like that. When that didn't happen, it was very interesting.
I thought you were going to say you're one of those monsters that reads the last 2 pages of a book before you start.
I wasn't going to ask.
I don't know. I do sometimes spoil myself for a story if it's like really flagging and I want to figure out whether I should keep going. But no, what I do
But not in
very
this book.
Right. What I do very often is check, how much more do I have? Or if I read up to this page, how far, like how long is this chapter? And then I'll accidentally read some stuff. And I couldn't help but notice the title at the end of the book.
End of the book for me is very much about whether we, as the reader, accept that there is a future for life on the planet. And again, that question of what is humanity? Is this important? And to me, I've written down my notes. What is the one characteristic in humanity that will tell us that it's going to be okay? And for me, it's compassion is the one that I've written down. The fact that you'd have care for somebody else's welfare, and that they wanted blood, they want to see a hanging or a lynching, and they were saved from it because it actually it wasn't good for the individual or the struggle that he'd had. She recognized his struggle, and actually, even though her husband was killed by him and all the rest of it, there was real compassion in there. And I think we as the reader kind of go, okay, there's a future for this world. There's a destination that going forward in time, they could recover from this and rebuild society.
I think her whole introduction to that and how she dealt with it and how she tried to warn him was showing you that even though she was infected, that it wasn't going to go into like some sort of savage thing. She was still kind of what you would recognize as humanity, which I guess is the whole reason that she was brought in like that. Because you're right. Otherwise, you would be so hopeless that it just basically would be over, because you didn't see any of those exactly humanitarian traits in the group that he met and stuff. So
yeah, it was horrifying, but I did feel a hope there. Yeah. So
yeah.
I don't think the book works without hope in there. It had to insert hope in there for it to be effective, for us to think that the struggle has to be worth it at the end of the day. It has to be, there's a reason to keep fighting, there's a reason to keep surviving, to create a point where, things can be rebuilt.
Yeah.
Did it in some ways that his struggle was pointless because he, at the end of the day, got nothing out of it except to maybe view himself as a monster, but the others are struggling similarly to what he was. I don't think that's the point that is being made, but is it an interpretation?
Well, you could read into it that this is a new species, really,
Mm,
that's created here, and that this is the end of humanity. It, the end of Homo sapiens. And that he is just dying off as a species, like dinosaurs have, like other species have in the past, and that it could be interpreted that way.
mm,
But that he played a role in their society, in unifying them, because they had to work together to bring him down. So there was also that, because he was the monster from their perspective. So in a sense,
Right.
maybe he helped build that society, help them become a little bit more civilized, or I will not say human, but a different type of human with the similar principles, like you said, compassion was there. So there is hope for a new kind of humanity.
And it's that age-old question, isn't it, of why? I know I've had students in the past going, why do they keep on looking to space for like alien races and stuff? And I would say, like, because soon, and if they ever find anything, all our petty squabbles become meaningless. Differences over religion, all of that kind of stuff. It matters none.
You think? I think it would just become even more permanent.
Well, I think that's what The Expanse kind of says. A little bit, I think that's what it's arguing. But I think if we're going to face
unless
that,
they attack us,
look at
Once you get over the wonder, the squabbles will come back. Don't worry.
And what did they do in The Expanse? Again, they attacked each other first. They pretty much destroyed Earth. So not a perfect time. Yeah, I can see that happening.
Well, I've thought like how COVID kind of was another life form impacting us, and people had different reactions to that. And this is really a similar idea, like we were just saying about the, like a pandemic coming and having society break down. So just a lot to think about there.
Well, it did change our society to a considerable degree, how we work, how we interact, how, it wasn't on a global extinction level, but lives were changed forever. Our society has changed forever.
And how the bats are responsible in both stories. Like that, I don't know.
We pick a great time to start this, yeah.
Bats get a bad rap.
Was it convenient that it was a vampire bat?
Yeah.
That made it
Okay, that was kind of my only, my major issue with the book, was how the vampires were portrayed. That was the thing that I almost DNF, because it was like, these are not vampires, these are zombies with fangs. What are you doing? And then I had to remind myself that this was written in the 50s, and it was, basic. It was his idea of vampire was Dracula, and the Dracula in the books is not the Dracula. No, it's not Gary Oldman. It's it's, so I had to put it in that context so I wouldn't get angry. Other than that, it was fine.
But also their interpretation of these I guess evolved or like different creatures, because they seem to have some genetic modifications too, because they have different teeth and so on. It feels
the bacteria
like
elongates the teeth. Yeah, that part is she needs to remember. Just, sorry.
Yeah, sure.
It can happen.
It seems to be a myth propagated by, we saw a scene where he has a run-in with some members of the church, and they are saying vampires have come to attack us because, I don't know, we're being sinful or whatever. So it seems to be something that maybe if it hadn't been for those religious mythologies, they would think about it more as a scientific problem, but they're thinking of them as vampires because of how they look and how they act. And also, we didn't actually see, obviously, because he's the last man living, see them, suck blood out of each other. But was that implied that they did do that? Did they? He claimed that was one of the vectors for spreading the disease, right? Anyway, yeah. But I think it was interesting. I think the vampire interpretation of the sick people probably was propagated by some maybe potentially religious elements or the mythological aspects. It's like fear propagated it. They weren't true vampires, perhaps.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'd like to talk about the music.
Yes.
Yeah, classic music.
So the classic music, the fact he's a classic music fan, I went down a rabbit hole.
Did you listen to all the pieces he did too?
I knew some of them and I listened to the other ones, and then I looked up the notes for what they represent. So I only did a couple of them, right? But the first three that are announced, that he listened to the 3rd, the 7th, and the 9th symphonies of Beethoven, right? So 3rd Symphony, the Eroica, which is my favorite, is the symphony that he wrote about Bonaparte, right? So it's about tyranny and about the representation of power and power decentralized from a government kind of idea. So you can use that whatever way you want. 7th is like a rhythm and about the vivacity and nature of life. So how nature plays in with him. And 9th is, well, it ends in his ode to joy and this kind of hope thing at the end. It's nearly the plot of the book, the 3rd, the 7th, and the 9th, from start to finish, the way through. The one that he's listening to drown out the noise of the vampires is an atonal piece with a repeating, like, monotonous line in it. Interesting that he would use like a droning noise to drone out another noise, and he destroys a record in it called The Year of the Plague. And The Year of the Plague is not a real record. It's the only one that doesn't actually exist from all the pieces of music that are in there, and it's the one that he destroys, which I think is kind of interesting in its own right. So I'm sure there are more bits in it, but I just thought the choice of the pieces of music that he did kind of had led more meaning to the story.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna have to go and investigate that.
Yeah, same here. I didn't even go to look them up. I was just like, cool, that's a best reference. Let's not Google it.
Really lends credence to everything on the page is intentional. Right.
Lesson number 1,000: why I could never write a book. I ain't doing that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I didn't even think about that much.
Yeah, thanks for looking that up, Chris. That was awesome. That added so much color to the book.
Yeah, I was just like, I just kind of thought, like, why the 3rd, the 7th, and 9th? As soon as I seen that, I was like, there's a reason why you would only pick those 3. Otherwise, you would just write the Beethoven symphonies or one of Beethoven's symphonies or something like that. And I was like, right, there's a reason why he's picked literally these 3 things out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
That's cool.
That's cool. Were there any other subjects we left out? Anything else that anyone would like to bring up?
I have 2 quotes. So the first one's from chapter 3, and it's where he says the strength of the vampire is that no one will believe in him, which again, this idea of him as the legend and otherwise.
Yeah.
Cool. And the second one was the idea of this idea, and it's his own problem with this. The line is, personal death still was a thing beyond his comprehension, or beyond his own comprehension. The fact that for all that he's been living in a world where death has been at his door every night and all the rest of it, but it was only when he was faced with the point where he thought, I am going to die, that he just couldn't face it. He got very afraid. His primal part of him came out. He had to grab the bunny gun. He had to attack the men who were breaking into his house because he couldn't take the chance that they were just coming to take him peacefully or otherwise. And I thought those two sentences were ones that I picked out and went, they have multiple meanings throughout this story.
Yeah.
Yep.
Isn't that the believing in the vampire one? Wasn't that in Dracula as well?
Oh, it might have been. Yeah.
The novel, because that was part of his power as well. That people didn't want to believe in him.
What's that idea? The boogeyman, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Which he is.
I haven't read the book in a while, and I remembered that quote, and I was thinking, oh, yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah, it's been a long time since I read
I
it.
like vampires. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. And I like there was one line that said, understanding, he was talking about the monotony, and he was like, understanding that gave him that sort of quiet peace. And, that, and of course that peace wasn't long lasting, but it just related to when you understand anything that's happening to you in life, you get a little bit more peace about it than when you're confused and you're trying to make sense of what's happening. So it was a nice line, I thought.
Yeah. Does
Here's a
anyone else
question.
want- Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Here's a question. If you had to rank the two books you've read so far, if you've read both of them, which one's the better book? If we were to start to do like a top 10, if we were to go through all 180 of these books, right, and do a top 10, even 2 books in, how would you rank them? It's very, very difficult.
A top 2.
Which one's first and second?
I really think this, for me, I Am Legend would go first. I think because how subtle it was, so that the payoff of the twist was so good. But I might change my mind later. But right now, that's where I say.
I'm trying to remember. I know I checked it today. I gave I Am Legend 4 stars. But I think I gave Forever War 5. But as I was a lot more demanding in my ratings, I guess, back then. No, I
heard that.
Maybe I would put this I Am Legend second, just because it is shorter, and without that ending, I don't know. I don't say that it wouldn't make sense, but as a novel, I mean, it reads more like a novella. I don't know. So yeah, I will stick to my rating.
Good.
I love both books, and this could be complete recency bias, but I think I'd put I Am Legend first. I think both books are incredibly strong thematically, which is like my favorite thing in reading. But there's just, it's the examination of the human in this and the character, whereas Forever War doesn't really do characters, and so much it looks kind of societal stuff, and this one looks at the individual. They're almost like an opposite of each other in a lot of ways. So I'll probably put I Am Legend first.
You know I want this one first. You already know that.
Yeah. But I think. Oh no, go ahead, Drum.
No, I was gonna say I didn't read the other one because I was aware I didn't have to get through it. But now, if we're gonna have to rate them all as we're going along, I'll now have to go back and read it just to make sure I can add them all in.
It's worth the read, definitely.
Yeah, it is. It is a good book. Sorry, Chris, you were saying?
I was just gonna say that I like both books after having these discussions, though, regardless of what my initial feelings were on them.
Yep. Definitely the discussions added a lot more to both books. I did rate, like Susanna, 4 stars for this one and 5 stars for the Forever War. But the 4 stars was because the sexual fantasy stuff really bothered me. But I got different perspective on that after talking to you all. So I think it's down to the character work, and by that I mean, we talked in the Forever War about how I forget his name, but the main character, Mandela, yes, he's sort of this bland person who is just a pawn in the course of war, and this guy seems to have personality. He listens to music, he loves his wife, and has a lot to for us to sort of try and find connections with him about. So I guess from that perspective, this was a more easy read for me. but I think in terms of the themes that it touches upon, the Forever War feels like the more important book to me. Leila, did you go already and say which one you prefer? Okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, cool. Anything else?
The next book looks good.
Yes. Speaking of,
I didn't realize it was that long.
it is big. So it is actually a bind up of 4 books. It's the complete series, and so we will do the first 2 books and then next month, and then the next 2 books the month after. So we will be reading Cities in Flight up to October.
Oh, okay. So they're 4 short.
Yeah, the 4 short books. Yeah.
The 4 short books.
Sounds good.
They make up 600 odd pages.
Yeah. These books have a pretty small font.
Yes, they do.
Oh.
Yeah. The Kindle book had me thinking, it's only 100 pages, but then I spent hours and hours reading this one. So
my memory is that it isn't quite as dense as either of the 2 books that we've just read, though, because of it was released in like serialized form in a magazine over a period of time. So it was very much about being chunky writing and, kind of get that bit of the story, read the next one kind of thing. So
yeah.
Is Cities in Flight, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
it is.
Cities
It's
in
James
Flight.
Blish.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome.
I have a theory that I want to test as we go along. I think that, I've read a couple of Philip K. Dick books that make me think this, but I feel like women are somewhat overly sexualized, or like the sexual thoughts aspect of it is a little highish in the early sci-fi. It almost feels like a requirement. So I want to see as we go along if any authors do that differently, or because it felt in this book, again, like I understand what you all said, but it felt unnecessary, but realistic, I suppose, now that you pointed out. But or it could have been done differently to make the same point, I thought. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes.
Definitely. Chris and Jared, I already apologise for my awkward questions going forward with these books and women.
That's okay. The early sci-fi was kind of a boys' club back then. It was hard for women to break into the field back then. There were some, but so that doesn't surprise me that early sci-fi has a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of feeling a bit awkward because I didn't see it as an issue. I mean, it didn't bother me. I thought I didn't say anything before because everyone was having an opinion. But I don't know what that makes me, but it should be with the girls, and I'm just like, well, it seemed normal, or it felt necessary for the character. I mean, it fit into his condition, his psychological state. Yeah, he was lonely, he was drunk, and he was horny. I didn't see it as a problem. So the point is, don't worry about me. I read anything. I don't have issues.
I'm happy to read anything. I wish I'd highlighted it now, because I swear there was a beginning of one of the chapters where the beginning sentence was unbelievably sexist, and I didn't highlight it. And I think I might go away and then come back, put it in our group chat, because I was blown away by that first sentence, and I was just like, what on earth?
There was one, yeah.
And I was just like, I did understand the concept of, you're lonely and you're whatever, but I just felt even if I was in that situation for 3 years, I wouldn't be thinking that about, well, maybe that's just me, about that. And I was like, I can't see men having such a different view on sexuality and how they feel things and what they do when they get that. That's why I wanted to ask Jared and Chris their opinions, because I was like, is it so different if you're a guy? And it just seemed overly done. But everyone sees things differently. That's the whole point about reading it together.
I mean, we can't speak for all guys, So
You're not.
no.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's one of the topics I'm endlessly fascinated by. I think I said this in one of the Friday night conversations. I think it was one that was on with you. Was it Robin? It was the week before, whichever one it was. The difference between a male gaze and a female gaze. I sort of know what a male gaze feels like. I never experienced a female gaze, but actually hearing about that all the time, and through experiencing that through works of like literature or film or otherwise, and how the author either was male or female, and how they would represent that differently is like endlessly fascinating to me.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
And to your point, Susanna, I think usually it doesn't bother me if I find an explanation for it in the work. And I think in this case there was. I refused to see it because it bothered me so much until we talked to Chris and Jared about this. But it bothers me when it feels pointless or there for the sake of it. It felt like it was, at least the way it was written about, felt like it's there for the sake of it. Sure, it agrees with the character and so on, but it felt unnecessarily much. But yeah, that's just my opinion. Cool. I guess we're ready to sign off then. We'll go around again. Susanna, would you like to tell us where to find you and your books?
My books are available pretty much everywhere. On Amazon, it's Timelessness. There's 5 books. And my channel is Den of the Weird. I'll have it. I probably should put it on my name next time. And just Google Susanna Imaginario and you'll find everything. Don't worry.
My name is Chris Mohan. You can find me on my YouTube channel, which is just my name. You can find me. Well, I was going to say tomorrow, but we're recording it tomorrow. Talking about Wars in Light and Shadow with some of the lovely people here. And as you'll find me on X at 7:00 Shadow. Mostly just liking it and retweeting posts, but yeah.
I can't say X. It just doesn't sound right at all. I X'd. I read on X. There wasn't an X. I can't. It just doesn't flow.
They're just asking for a lot of innuendo.
I'm Jared. You can find me at The Fantasy Thinker on YouTube and on the Page Chewing forums as well.
I'm Robin. Bookends and Biscuits is my YouTube channel, and I think it's just Bookends Biscuit maybe on X, which is where I'm mostly on social media, but check Page Chewing forums as well.
Hi, and I'm. You can find me at El Goshi on X or Validity Magazine on X.
And I'm Varsha. My YouTube channel is Reading by the Rainy Mountain. We all hang out quite a bit on the Page Chewing forum where we make plans for these reading groups. And also, I most recently have a podcast called Bright Threads in the Tapestry. If you'd like to check that out, it's available on a few different podcast platforms, which I also post as a playlist on my YouTube channel. So it's available both places. That's everything for today. We'll see everyone in a month. If you'd like to join us on this reading group, or for some or all of them, we are reading Cities in Flight. Yeah, that's in frame. Next month. We're reading the first half of it. It's a bind-up of 4 books, like we said earlier. It's we're going to be reading the first 2 books next month, and then the next 2 the month after. If you'd like to join us, either for just the reading group and join us on the forum discussion threads, or to participate in the discussions here, come check out the Page Chewing forum. There are calendar events that you can sign up or RSVP for. Cool. Thank you.